I thought we could talk really quickly about a grammar issue that seems to come up a lot, especially with newer writers, younger writers, or writers who are maybe lacking some of the support and education that they really need. And that's active and passive voice. You hear a lot of people talking about, oh, don't write in the passive voice. Passive voice is bad. Passive voice is wrong. They frame it in these very, intense terms, and they never really get around to describing what the passive voice is or why it's bad, just that it's bad, so they can, wag a finger at you. And what I want to do is kind of explain the difference between the two and explain the separation between the two, because it isn't just a grammar thing. This isn't just like an English class in school where you're going to get it wrong and then flunk the test or something. There's a technical component to this which a lot of people focus on. It's important to know the technical stuff. It's important to know the grammar. It's useful to know, like, this is this part of speech and that's that part of speech. And when we talk about passive voice being bad, that's the kind of stuff people grab for. Look, concrete rules, that's why it's bad. But when an editor comes to you and says, hey, your stuff is really passive, they're kind of talking about the verb structure and the particular parts of speech and stuff, but they also mean it in a contextual sense, a narrative sense. But we'll cover that. For now, let's just get started with some basics. Active voice is not automatically correct, and passive voice is not automatically incorrect. They are two tools. Just like show and tell, they are not diametrically opposed. They are not opposite ends of a magnet. One is not all right and one is not all wrong. They are two tools. We can use them interchangeably and in different spots all over our work, and it's going to be just fine. The easiest way to explain what passive voice is and what active voice is to talk about the subject, the object, and the verb in a sentence. So if the subject is doing the action, that is generally a very active voice to write in. And if the subject is receiving the action, meaning somebody else is doing it or it has been done, then that's a very passive construction, a passive voice. They're useful. They're not all right and not all wrong. It's just a matter of, is it clear who's doing the thing, or has the thing been done? And really what we're looking at and what we're talking about here is, what are we prioritizing when we write? Forget about rightness and wrongness. Forget about correctness and getting an A versus flunking a test. This is a matter of, are we writing for clarity, for utility, the opportunity to go from this sentence to the next sentence? Are we writing to focus on tension? Are we writing to focus on action? Passive verb construction does some of that, but it becomes much more contextual, much more dependent on the sentences around it. If you chain together a lot of very passive sentences, your paragraph is overall weaker. It's less clear. It's not as engaging to read. It doesn't really seem like anything's happening. You can point to the verbs, but it doesn't feel like anything's happening. It's just kind of there on the page, like we've spilled something, as opposed to making something that's engaging and grabbing the reader. Our goal is to always engage and grab the reader. So we want that combo platter of active voice and passive voice to kind of come along and help make the best movie within the reader's imagination. So let's take a look at a really simple active construction. I made the bed. It's active because it's very clear as to who did what. The subject, I, did the verb, made, on the object, the bed. I made the bed. Easy, active, straightforward. There's nothing wrong with that sentence. It's fine. We can get fancier with it. We'll do that later. But it's pretty straightforward in terms of what it's saying and what it's having you understand. When you read that sentence, you are aware that a person did a thing, and we can visualize that action. We probably want to be more specific than this because it's a simple sentence. I'm just trying to do an example. We probably want to detail this out and talk about the sheets and the pillowcases and the blankets and, getting things fluffed and getting things like organized and stuff. But by and large, if we're just trying to say, hey, here's a sentence example, I made the bed does the job. But let's go look at a passive example. The bed was made by John. Now, all of a sudden, instead of focusing on who did the action and what the action is, now we're sort of putting our focus on the thing that received the action. Now we're making it about the bed, not the making and not me, not John, but now it's about the bed. This is a weird construction. If it's just floating out there by itself with no other sentences around it, this isn't an answer to a question like, who made the bed? The bed was made by John. If it's just hanging out in exposition and there's not a lot of context around it, this sounds weird. And it's hard to really know what you want the reader to focus on when they read this sentence. Do you want them thinking about the bed? Do you want them thinking about the maid? Do you want them thinking about John? Whereas if we flipped it around and went backwards one, and we went back to I made the bed, it's very clear where you want focus. I, or the bed being made, the action becomes more critical in an active voice. Whereas in a passive voice, we're kind of diffusing, we're kind of watering down our focus. It's accurate, like it's a fine sentence, but it doesn't really get us as much clarity mentally as it could. And again, we're just going to drill this point. One is not better than the other. Active is not better than passive. Passive is not automatically wrong just because it's passive. They're tools. We sometimes pick active sentences. We sometimes pick passive sentences. The world doesn't come to an end. It's just a matter of picking the right tool for the job, the thing we're trying to do with it. And it doesn't have to be simple. You don't always have to write like simple, I made the bed, she did this, they did that sentences. You could get, bigger and more elaborate. Captain James Marshall stood on the deck of his least favorite ship with his least favorite crew and wept. That's an active sentence. Elaine noticed the window had been left open is passive because it's unclear as to who opened the window. But both of those sentences are normal in context. Captain James Marshall standing on the deck of a ship could easily fit anywhere inside an Age of Sail novel, a romance novel, or anything. Elaine noticing the window open can go anywhere. Romance novel, mystery novel, crime thriller, horror story. Like the type of sentence we're making fits wherever because sentences can go wherever. It's not like, I'm writing this genre, so I have to be active because that's what the genre calls for. No, it's, again, tools. It's about trying to get the best movie, the clearest movie, the most engaging film in the imagination of the reader's mind theater. So how do we identify this? Who cares? Who cares? Why does it matter if we know what active and we know what passive sentences are? Like, who gives a shit about this? Well, here's how you do it. You want to identify the subject, the verb, and the object of a sentence. Who's doing the thing? What are they doing? And what are they doing it to, with, on, near, or around? And then ask, is the subject doing the verb, or is this about the object receiving the verb? Elaine noticed the window had been left open, makes it unclear as to, who opened the window. So that's an issue, but we can use that. We can use that to our advantage. That doesn't make it wrong. It just means we're probably going to need to have a sentence at some point talking about the window being open or somebody doing it. But the more critical point here is that, again, that uncertainty comes back into play. Where do you want the reader to focus? When they read this sentence, what do you want them to picture? Some people are going to say they want to focus on Elaine noticing. So you want to imagine whatever Elaine looks like, and you want to imagine Elaine noticing whatever. Some people are going to say, this is about the window. You got to imagine the window being open and Elaine noticing it is secondary. And both of those people are right in context. That's the most important thing. Too often when we teach grammar in a vacuum. Here's a rule, learn it. Here's another rule, learn it. And that misses the point. It always depends on context. Because what's the next sentence going to be? What's the next image you want the reader to imagine? What's the next thing on the screen in my brain? So the context matters. If we start thinking about Elaine noticing, we can, the utility that generates is to give us more Elaine later. But if we make it about the window, then we're sort of open-ended. We're coming up with the mystery of it, the unknownness of it. And it matters what you're trying to say one sentence at a time. Side note, this is why you don't really have to sweat this if you treat every sentence like a camera. So your goal is to always put a movie in the reader's brain. When the reader reads each sentence, they're trying to add it to the pile of other things you've said to help imagine the story. And sometimes you're going to be active about it, and sometimes you're going to be passive about it. And when you want to be clear, go active. When you want to kind of create some distance, help cement that context, go passive. Editors are going to yell at you for this. Teachers are going to yell at you for this. Readers will try and yell at you for this, because if you go too passive too much too often, you create more and more distance, and it becomes less and less engaging, and the story slows down, and it's hard to follow. And you want to make sure that you are constantly keeping the reader engaged. So it's that blend, that mix of active and passive coming together to always make sure you're trying to put the most engaging imagery, the most engaging scenes, the most impassioned feelings in the reader's imagination. So, for the grammar nerds, here's how you identify passive voice on the page. The subject plus some version of the verb to be plus the past participle, that's a verb in the past tense, and then the rest of the sentence. The house is cleaned weekly, passive. I had been dressed already, passive. The ball was thrown by the pitcher, passive. It's not wrong. None of those are wrong. But is it effective for what it is you're trying to do? When you write the sentence, just get the sentence out. Get it on the page. When you are revising it later, when you're trying to rebuild it, when you're trying to polish it and get all the ducks in a row about it, think about it in terms of, is this sentence communicating the idea as effectively as it could? And that's really the key to understanding passive and active voice. Is this sentence putting a clear enough, engaging enough image inside the reader's head? You can do this. It's just grammar. It's just nuts and bolts, but it's got to be thought of in context. I hope that helps. If you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments for this video, and I'll be happy to answer them or give you more examples or walk through more parts. But thank you so much for checking this out. I hope this helped explain a more useful, practical explanation of passive and active voice. See ya.